It's time again for the Insiders with Chuck Chvala and Scott Jensen, sponsored by the Wisconsin Counties Association and the Tommy G. Thompson Center on Public Leadership.
Hi, I'm Scott Jensen, former Assembly Speaker.
I'm Chuck Chvala, former Senate Majority Leader.
And we're the Insiders. And the ultimate insider topic is, of course, the state budget, where about half of the money goes to K-12 schools and the University of Wisconsin system. So that's where half of the money goes. That's where at least half of the debate is always about. So Chuck, there was a huge deal that was cut with regards to K-12 schools. And then there was also a Republican proposal with regards to the UW. What do you think of both of those?
Well, in K-12 education, big losers, public education, they got a $385 per student increase in what they're going to be able to spend. And by the way, the bad news is $650 million out of the billion that's going to be spent on that came out of property taxes. Republicans insisted on it. Instead of taking it out of the surplus, they took it out of property taxes. That's bad news. And then the even worse news is that voucher schools get, compared to the $300 and some dollars, they get $3,000 when it comes to high schools and another $1,100 when it comes to pupils in grade schools. And by the way, that is in addition to what they're already getting. So a huge discrepancy there. Problem with the public tax money coming out of property taxes. It's just an outrageous situation for public schools. And at the same time that they're doing that, the university is faring very poorly. The Republicans have really tried to aggressively go after the university. Obviously, educated people are not in their wheelhouse. And what's this kerfuffle about the engineering school for the University of Wisconsin-Madison? Republicans killed it once. There's $150 million in private funding out of this $300 and some million building, another 1,000 engineering students. And by the way, engineering students are the people who would be most conservative on campus. And Republicans can't even stomach that. What do engineers do, by the way, for your state? And by the way, when they go to college someplace, they say they build things. They are the people we need to build things. This makes absolutely no sense for the Republicans unless there's an agenda to say, and I've heard this was the trade, if you give up DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, we might be able to get you that campus building for engineering. That is a very bad trade and a very ugly trade in this time in our country and in this time in Wisconsin.
Well, I think you're right that the engineering building is a piece of leverage for Republicans in regards to the state budget. They also eliminated 180 some positions that had to do with diversity, equity, and inclusion activities at the university. And I think they're doing that, frankly, in response to what they're hearing from parents. I know that all of you folks who live in Madison think that the university is a wonderful place. And I think that all of us who pay tuition to send our children there think it's a great school. But we also think it's a propaganda machine. I mean, there kids who go, every parent who in Wisconsin knows that if you send your kid to UW-Madison, they're not only going to get a good education, they're going to get a dose of liberal, woke, progressive philosophy that they have to have first. It's sort of like the appetizer for everything else you're supposed to get there. And a lot of folks have just had it like, hey, I just want my kid to get a good education. Why do we have to do all of this other stuff? So I think they're being responsive to it. The UW has just plain ignored them about it for years. And they're now trying to get some leverage in order to get change with regards to that. Let's just focus on education, not on politics, and not on indoctrination. I think with regards to the K-12 deal, Chuck, you're the one who's out of step here. This is a deal that the governor, the Democratic governor, cut with Republican legislators that was voted on a bipartisan basis in the legislature. And the reason that the private schools and the choice schools got a larger per dollar increase than the public schools did is because historically, the children whose parents choose to send them to a private school or charter school only get about 60% of what a kid who gets sent to a public school gets. And they're trying to close that gap because it really shouldn't matter. You know, every kid should get the same investment in their future, regardless of what school their parent chooses, whether it's a public charter or a private school that's participating in a state-funded program. And that's the logic behind it. And it's still huge. And it's been closed a little bit in this. And that's why you saw Democrats from Milwaukee actually vote for this. And the reason is those kids are all their constituents too. So this is the largest increase in education funding in the history of the state of Wisconsin. But Chuck is reflecting the education establishment's response. Whoa, it's only the biggest increase ever. We should have gotten all the money. That's what they're always about. It's about the adults and the money in the public schools. That's what they care about. But this budget actually put the kids first. It increased per pupil spending for all of those kids.
Tommy Thompson would be deeply disappointed that his former chief of staff, Scott Jensen, does not recognize that if you take the actual percentage numbers based on the actual value, this is an inflated number. Tommy Thompson put more money into public education than this amount if you take the inflation adjusted numbers. Okay, but maybe Scott doesn't want to defend his former boss. That's okay with me.
Too.
But I'll do that because I'm bipartisan. But here's the deal. Property taxpayers in the state are not going to like the fact that they spent $650 million to basically subsidize an increase in private school education. That's what happened here. And guess what? In the election that's coming up, Republicans are going to have to defend it, and they are going to have a very difficult time doing so. And they're going to have to do it with redistricted districts that are going to be very different. This was not good for public education, certainly not good in comparison to what happened with voucher schools. And the University of Wisconsin, I am one of those who I believe that Republicans, conservatives, I don't care how right-wing you are, if they're invited to campus, they should be able to speak and be able to speak their mind and not be interrupted. And if there's a liberal who wants to go to some, I don't know what the conservative version, it must be Ron DeSantis's college in Florida, they should be able to speak uninterrupted. Every voice deserves to be heard. That to me is what the First Amendment is about. We can have that discussion, but that is not to say that we shouldn't be respectful of making sure that we have a diverse population of kids in our schools so that kids can operate in the world with a lot of different voices, a lot of different languages, a lot of different colors. And I don't think that anybody's against that. And I don't know why this is such a hot button, but I'll tell you what, whatever that discussion is, and there's a legitimate discussion to be had, it should not mean that any entity, much less Robin Voss and an ideological group of Republicans, could stop the university from having an engineering building built. They are talking about more than 1,000 engineers a year, additional who will come through that program. We are woefully short on what we can handle in Wisconsin. And by the way, in comparison to our neighbors, we are really down. This is an outrageous act, and it tells you why this deal is cut. Robin Voss will hold a gun to anybody's head in order to get what he wants. And this, I'll tell you what, this engineering campus building is a perfect example of why people are absolutely outraged about his behavior. And his people, Robin may not be running next year, but the people he leaves behind will pay the price.
Boy, every week you take your chance to take a kick at Speaker Voss. And the only thing I can say is that's because he's probably at the top of his game. He has never been more powerful, never been more involved in getting sweeping huge deals across every possible subject area, whether it's the budget, shared revenue, K-12, alcohol laws. These are some of the biggest deals we have seen in a long time. And the one common element is the leadership of Speaker Voss.
And you'll have, if you give him credit, you also have to give him blame for stopping 1,000 more engineers from coming out of Wisconsin. Think about that, Wisconsin, when you send your kids to Madison, or when you try to send them to Madison to get them in the engineering school. Remember who brought that to you? Scott's right. It was Robin Voss.
We'll see you next week.
You've been listening to The Insider with Chuck Chvala and Scott Jensen, sponsored by the Wisconsin Counties Association and the Tommy G. Thompson Center on Public Leadership.